Juliana hummed softly as she applied a coat of deep red lipstick, her eyes fixed on a reflection in the bedroom mirror. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow through the curtains, highlighting the subtle lines around her eyes. She was 32. She smoothed down her form-fitting black dress. She was excited. Somewhere along the line, Wesley's voice startled her. She turned to see him leaning against the door frame, his tie loosened and a puzzled expression on his face. "Oh, just meeting up with some friends," Juliana lied smoothly, her heart racing. "I thought you'd be working late again," Wesley replied, shrugging his shoulders and slumping slightly. "The project wrapped up early," he added. "I thought maybe we could have dinner together for once." Guilt knotted Juliana, but she pushed it aside. "I'm sorry, I already made plans," she replied. "Tomorrow," Wesley nodded, looking a little disappointed. He headed down the hallway, leaving Juliana to think. She sighed, turning back to the mirror. The woman staring back at her looked confident, desirable, and like a new Juliana. Wesley was a good man, hardworking and loyal, but somewhere along the way, they'd lost their spark. The long hours he put in at the office left her feeling neglected and yearning for something more. Juliana's phone buzzed with a text from Sullivan: "Can't wait to see you, beautiful. 30 minutes. Her pulse quickened as she read the message. Their affair had started innocently enough, a chance meeting at a coffee shop, witty banter, that turned into long conversations and finally a stolen kiss that ignited a fire she thought had long since burned out. She grabbed her purse and made her way downstairs, finding Wesley in the kitchen. Half Juliana said, "I won't be out too late," as she heartily put together a sandwich. Wesley looked up from his work, his eyes searching hers. "Jules, is everything okay? You've been different lately." Juliana forced a smile. "Everything's fine, I've been busy with work and friends. You know how it is." "Yeah, I guess I do," Wesley replied, sounding a bit resigned. Juliana reached for the door, and the sound of tires on gravel made her freeze. A car door slammed, followed by confident footsteps approaching the house. Juliana expected someone. Wesley asked, moving towards the front door before Juliana could respond. There was a sharp knock. Wesley opened the door, revealing a tall, handsome man with a cocky grin. "Can I help you?" Wesley asked, his voice full of confusion. The stranger's gaze moved past Wesley, locking on at Juliana, ready to go. Juliana felt the blood drain from her face. As Wesley turned to her, his expression a mix of shock and dawning realization. "Jules, what's going on?" Wesley demanded, his voice tight with anger. Sullivan stepped forward, his presence filling the doorway. "I think it's pretty clear what's going on. Your wife is going on a date with me tonight. It's not negotiable." The room seemed to tilt on its axis as Juliana watched Wesley's face contort with a myriad of emotions: disbelief, hurt and finally rage. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Wesley growled, his fists clenching at his sides. Sullivan smirked. "I'm the man your wife's been seeing for the past few months." The name Sullivan, by the way, Wesley whirled to face Juliana, his eyes blazing. He demanded, "Is this true? Have you been cheating on me?" Juliana's her mouth went dry as she realized her carefully constructed lies were about to come undone. "Wesley, it's not what you think, not what I think," she said, her voice trembling. "There's a man at our door, claiming he's taking my wife on a date, and it's not what I think," Wesley replied, his voice filling the room. Sullivan stood against the door frame, watching the scene unfold with an amused expression. "Come on, Juliana, we don't want to be late for our reservation," he said. Wesley stepped between them, his body. "Jules, if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." Juliana felt a surge of defiance rise within her. She'd felt trapped in this marriage, suffocated by routine and neglect for too long. She wasn't going to be told what to do by Wesley. She was a grown woman, capable of making her own choices. She was capable of choosing to betray their marriage vows and lie to him. "For months, you haven't exactly been the model husband. Jules, you've been holding it in for years. When was the last time you made me feel wanted or appreciated?" Sullivan gives me what you haven't in years. Wesley recoiled as if he'd been slapped. So, that's it, our 10 years of marriage means nothing because I've been working hard to provide for us. Sullivan cleared his throat. As fascinating as this domestic drama is, Juliana looked between the two men. Wesley's face was a mask of pain and betrayal, while Sullivan was confident and alluring in that moment. She made her choice. I can do whatever I want, she declared, her voice trembling slightly. I'm a free woman, Wesley, you can't cage me anymore. She grabbed her purse and brushed past Wesley, who stood frozen in disbelief as she reached Sullivan. He wrapped an arm around her waist and pulled her close. Wesley called after her, but she ignored him. She paused at the door, looking back at the man she'd once promised to love forever. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in her heart. Then she felt Sullivan's hand on the small of her back, urging her forward. I'm sorry, Wesley, she said softly. But I need to do this for me. With those words, she stepped out into the warm evening air, leaving behind. Juliana slid into the passenger seat, her hands shaking as she buckled her seat belt. Sullivan started the engine, flashing her a triumphant grin. They pulled away from the curb, and she caught sight of Wesley in the rearview mirror. He was standing in the doorway, a broken figure, watching his world drive away. She turned her gaze forward, pushing down the twinge of regret that threatened to surface. She was more than ready to reply, forcing a smile. The car accelerated, carrying Juliana towards an uncertain future, leaving behind the fractured foundation of the life she once knew. The cool evening air whipped through Juliana's hair as Sullivan's car sped down the highway, and Juliana's heart raced with excitement and anxiety. She glanced at Sullivan, his confident smile illuminated by the dashboard lights. Where are we going? She asked, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. Sullivan reached over and squeezed her thigh. I thought we'd start with dinner at Lair, he said. Then who knows? The night is young, and so are we. Juliana forced a smile, pushing down. Juliana had a nagging doubt in her mind. Was this what she wanted? Freedom, excitement, a break from the mundane routine of her marriage? As they pulled up to the Valet à la Mer, Sullivan came around to open her door. Juliana stepped out, smoothing her dress and leading the way. The restaurant was buzzing with energy, soft jazz playing in the background as they were led to their table. Juliana felt eyes on her. A mix of admiration and judgment. She lifted her chin, determined to embrace this new chapter, and she felt eyes on her. Sullivan ordered an expensive bottle of wine without consulting the menu. He said, only the best for my girl, with a wink, as they sipped their wine. Juliana's phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She knew without looking that it was Wesley. She felt a pang of guilt, but she pushed it aside. Everything okay? Sullivan asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Juliana forced a bright smile, playing it cool. The evening went by in a blur of good food, wine, and Sullivan stories. But as the hours wore on, Juliana found herself struggling to stay engaged. Her mind kept drifting back to Wesley, imagining him alone in their house, devastated as they left the restaurant. Sullivan pulled her close. Your place or mine? Juliana hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea tonight. Sullivan's grip on her arm tightened slightly. Come on, Wes. After everything that went down earlier, you're going to play now. I'm not playing anything, Juliana said, pulling away. I just need some time to process everything. Sullivan's charming facade slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of anger. Fine. I'll take you to a hotel. You shouldn't go home tonight anyway. The drive to the hotel was tense. Sullivan's earlier warmth was gone. A cold silence fell as they pulled up to the entrance. He finally spoke. I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. We'll go apartment hunting. Juliana's head snapped up. Apartment hunting. I haven't even made my choice. Juliana. Sullivan cut her off. His tone left no room for argument. Do you want to crawl back to your husband with your tail between your legs? Juliana flinched at his harsh words. This wasn't the Sullivan she thought she knew. She thought she knew me. I'll see you in the morning, she managed, climbing out of the car as she checked into the hotel. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was alone, cut off from her home, her life turned upside down in the span of a few hours. In her room, Juliana finally looked at her phone. Dozens of missed calls and messages from Wesley, each one more desperate than the last. With trembling fingers, she dialed his number. Wesley's voice was rough, as if he'd been crying. "Where are you? Please come home. We can talk about this." Juliana's throat tightened. "I can't, Wesley. Not tonight." Why the pain in his voice was palpable because of him. "Maybe what we built wasn't enough," Juliana said quietly. "I need time to figure things out." Wesley's tone was calm. "You want time while you're out there with another man? Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" "I'm sorry," Juliana said quietly. Tears were streaming down her face. "I never meant to hurt you, but you did." Wesley's voice was cold. "Now you've made your choice, Juliana, now you have to live with it." The line went dead, leaving Juliana alone with her thoughts. The next few weeks passed in a blur. True to his word, Sullivan helped Juliana find an apartment. They spent their days exploring the city, trying new restaurants, and their nights tangled in each other's arms. On the surface, it was everything Juliana had dreamed of: passion, spontaneity, freedom from responsibility. But as the initial excitement faded, cracks began to appear in the facade. Sullivan's charming confidence often veered into arrogance, and his possessiveness, which once thrilled her, started to feel suffocating. One evening as they prepared for a night out, Juliana found herself longing for a quiet night in. "Do we have to? Should we go out tonight?" Juliana asked, slipping off her heels. "Maybe we could just order in and watch a movie." Sullivan's eyes flashed with annoyance. "Come on, Jules. Don't tell me you're turning into a homebody already. I thought you wanted excitement." "I do, but," tossing her shoes back to her get-dressing area, Juliana bit her lip, thinking of a retort that died on her tongue. This wasn't the first time Sullivan had dismissed her wishes, but she told herself it was a small price to pay for the life she now had. As the weeks turned into months, these small moments of discord grew more frequent. Sullivan's criticism of her clothes, her friends, even her laugh became a constant undercurrent in their relationship. One afternoon, Juliana was folding laundry when she came across one of Wesley's old t-shirts. She'd mixed her clothes with her things during the quick move out and held it to her face, inhaling the familiar scent of home. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the good times, lazy Sunday mornings, inside jokes, the comfort of knowing someone had her back, no matter what. The sound of the front door slamming jolted her from her. Ry Sullivan stormed in, his face like thunder. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, waving his phone in her face. On the screen was a photo of Juliana at lunch with a male coworker. Juliana explained that she'd been taken earlier that day. It was lunch with Tom from accounting. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "You're looking for your next victim," he said. "Why have you been so distant lately?" Juliana's voice rose. "It was just lunch. Don't play dumb," she said. "You know what I'm like. Always looking for the next thrill." "Man, to wrap around your finger," Juliana recoiled as if she'd been slapped. "My type, you don't know anything about me." "Me? If that's what you think, I know enough." Sullivan growled, grabbing her arm. "I know you're a cheater, a liar. Why should I be any different from your husband?" Juliana wrenched her arm free, anger and fear warring within her. "You're nothing like Wesley. He never treated me like this. Then why did you leave him? Face it, Jules. You're not going to get anywhere with me. I'm the best you're going to get." Juliana was hit by the words, which came at her like a physical blow. She stumbled back, tears blurring her vision. Without a word, she grabbed her purse and ran from the apartment. Sullivan's angry shouts followed her down the stairs. She found herself wandering the streets, her mind in turmoil. How would she end up here? The excitement and passion she craved had turned into something ugly. She felt more trapped than ever. Juliana had never felt this way in her marriage. As night fell, she found herself in a familiar neighborhood. Before she could second guess herself, she was walking up the path to her old house to Wesley. Her hand trembled as she rang the doorbell. Moments passed, each second an eternity. Finally, the door opened, revealing Wesley. He looked older, tired, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of her. Juliana. His voice was guarded, a far cry from the warmth she remembered. What are you doing here? Juliana opened her mouth but no words came out. Instead, a sob escaped her throat. All those months of pent-up emotion poured out. Wesley's expression softened for a moment before hardening again. Come in, he said gruffly. You shouldn't be out on the street like this. Juliana followed him into the living room. The familiar surroundings were both comforting and painful. She sank onto the couch, trying to compose herself. I'm sorry, she finally managed. I didn't. Nowhere else to go? Wesley stood by the fireplace, his posture rigid. What happened? Did lover boy finally show his true colors? The bitterness in his voice made Juliana flinch. Wesley, I made a terrible mistake. I thought I wanted freedom and excitement, but I was wrong. So wrong. And now what? Wesley's voice was cold. You think you can just come back and everything will be forgiven? That we can pick up where we left off. Juliana shook her head. Fresh tears spilled. Juliana was crying. She didn't expect him to forgive her easily. She just wanted to tell him how sorry she was for what she'd done. Wesley was quiet for a long moment, his internal struggle visible on his face. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled. Do you have any idea what you put me through, Jules? He asked. The humiliation, the pain. I trusted you, and you threw it all away for a fling with some arrogant bastard. It wasn't just a fling, Juliana whispered, I thought I loved him, but it wasn't real. Nothing about it was real. Wesley laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. Was our marriage real, or was I just a placeholder until something more exciting came along? Juliana took a step towards him, tentatively. Our marriage was the realest thing in my life. Wesley, I was too blind to see it then, but I see it now. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. For a moment, something flickered in Wesley's eyes. There was a hint of the love they once shared, but it disappeared just as quickly, replaced by a determined look. Thank you for your apology, Juliana, he said formally, but it doesn't change anything. You made your choice, and we both have to live with the consequences. Juliana stood frozen, the finality of his words washing over her. This was the true cost of her actions laid bare. She had gambled everything on a fantasy and lost it all. With a shaky nod, she gathered her purse at the door and turned back one last time. I'm sorry, Wesley, she said. For everything. Wesley's face was a mask of carefully controlled emotion. Goodbye, Juliana, he said. As the door closed behind her, Juliana felt the full weight of her choices crashing down upon her. Everything she had known, everything she had taken for granted, was gone. She was alone in the cold night, facing an uncertain future. Juliana stood on the sidewalk, the chill of the night seeping into her bones. Wesley's final goodbye echoed in her ears, a haunting reminder of all she had lost. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her shattered world as she walked aimlessly through. The streets were dark and her mind was racing. Where could she go? The thought of returning to Sullivan made her stomach churn. Her apartment no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a prison of her own making. With each step, the weight of her choices pressed down on her, threatening to crush her entirely. Days passed in a blur. Juliana called in sick to work and unable to face the normalcy of office life. When everything else had fallen apart, she ignored Sullivan's increasingly angry calls and messages, each one a stark reminder of how badly she had misjudged him and herself. It was the fifth day, and Juliana sat in her dimly lit apartment surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the remnants of her foolish dreams. A sharp knock at the door jolted her from her stupor. Her heart raced as she approached. Was it Sullivan, come to continue their argument? Or worse, had he somehow discovered her visit to Wesley? She took a deep breath and Juliana opened the door, surprised to see Wesley in the hallway. His face was set and determined. "What are you doing here?" Juliana's voice was shaky. "We need to talk," Wesley replied, his eyes hard and cold. "Please, come in," Juliana said, gesturing for him to enter. As he moved past her, she caught a whiff of his familiar scent, a painful reminder of the life she had thrown away. Wesley stood in the center of the living room. The room was a mess. Wesley looked at a photo of Giuliano and Sullivan. He smiled, but it was a sarcastic smile. He said, "Nice place." Juliana flinched at his words. "Wesley, I'm not here for apologies or explanations. I'm here to finalize this situation." Juliana's voice trembled. "What do you mean?" Wesley looked at her. He was cold and resolute. He told Juliana that he'd had time to think and realized he couldn't continue living in limbo. He said that their marriage was over and it was time they made it official. The word divorce hit Juliana like a physical blow. Despite everything, she clung to the hope that they could find their way back to each other. That hope was now gone. Juliana was shattered. She begged Wesley, her eyes filled with tears, "Please, we can't go on like this. We can't just give up on us. We have to try to work things out." "You killed us the moment you walked out that door with him," Wesley replied. He gestured to the photo of Sullivan. "You made your choice, Juliana. Now it's time to face the consequences." Juliana sank onto the couch. She was sitting on the couch, her legs no longer able to support her. She said, "I know I made a terrible mistake, Wesley, but our marriage meant everything to me. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive me?" Wesley's laugh was harsh and devoid of humor. He said, "Forgive you? Do you have any idea what you put me through? The humiliation of having my wife leave me for another man. The pitying looks from friends and colleagues. The sleepless nights wondering what I did wrong." His words cut deep, each one a reminder of the pain she had caused. Juliana buried her face in her hands, unable to meet his gaze. Wesley continued, his voice growing louder with each word. "Now, you've had your fun. Realize the grass isn't greener. You think you could just come back. That's not going to happen. Juliana, you need to understand that your actions have consequences. It's time you faced yours." Juliana looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I know I hurt you, Wesley. I know I can never take that back, but what we had was real. Don't throw it away because of one mistake." "One mistake?" Wesley's eyes flashed with anger. "You call months of lying and cheating one mistake? This wasn't a Juliana, you deliberately and systematically destroyed our marriage. I never saw it coming. I trusted you completely. I thought we were happy and had a future together. All the while, you were planning your escape." Juliana stood, reaching out to him. "Wesley, I never planned this." Wesley jerked away from her touch as if burned. "Don't try to justify what you did. There's no excuse or explanation that can make this right." No less firm. "I want you out of the house, Juliana. All of your things gone by the end of the week. I'll have my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. The sooner we can end this, the better." Juliana felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "You're kicking me out, Wesley. That's our home. We built it together. It took us an hour, maybe even a few weeks, to afford that house and give us the life you said you wanted. And how did you repay me? By throwing it all away for some cheap thrills with a man you barely knew." Each word stung a little more, reminding her of her own selfishness and betrayal. Juliana sank back onto the couch, the fight draining out of her. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice small. Wesley's laugh was bitter. It's no longer my problem, is it? Juliana, you made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. I'm sure your boyfriend will be happy to help you out if you mention Sullivan. Juliana felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. Sullivan and I are over. I realized what a mistake I'd made. How convenient for you, Wesley sneered. What did you think you could do? If you come crawling back, I'll welcome you with open arms. That's not how the real world works. Juliana, you don't get to reset people's lives when you're done playing your games. Juliana looked up at him and really looked at the man she had promised to love forever. The pain and anger etched on his face were a stark testament to the damage she had caused. That moment made her realize the full extent of what she'd lost, not just a husband, but a partner, a friend, a future. I'm sorry, Wesley, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. I know it doesn't change anything, but I'm truly sorry for all the pain I've caused you. Wesley's expression softened for a fraction of a second before hardening once more. You're right, he said, it doesn't change anything. I want you out of the house by Friday. After that, we'll communicate through our lawyers. He moved towards the door, pausing with his hand on the knob for a moment. Juliana allowed herself to hope that he might turn back and offer some small glimmer of forgiveness, but when he spoke, his voice was cold and final. Goodbye, Juliana. I hope your freedom was worth the price. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the sound deafeningly loud in the silence of the apartment. Julie sat motionless, the full weight of her actions crashing down upon her. She had gambled everything, her marriage, her home, her future. The next few days passed in a haze of. Juliana was consumed by grief and regret as she packed up her life. Each item served as a painful reminder of what she had thrown away. Friends called, their voices a mix of concern and judgment, but she let their messages go unanswered. What could she say? How could she explain the depth of her mistake and the enormity of her loss? On Friday morning, Juliana stood in the driveway of the home she had once shared with Wesley. Her car was packed with the remnants of her life, boxes stacked haphazardly in the back seat and trunk. She clutched the house key in her hand, its familiar weight now a burden. The front door opened, and Wesley stepped out. He looked tired, the past few months having taken their toll. For a moment, their eyes met. She was on her way to the house she had once shared with Wesley. Her car was packed with the remnants of her life. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in the back seat and trunk. She clutched the house key in her hand. It felt heavy now, like a burden. The front door opened, and Wesley stepped out. He looked tired. The past few months had taken their toll. For a moment, their eyes met. Juliana felt a brief connection to Wesley, but it was quickly replaced by hurt and betrayal. Is that all he wanted? Her voice was devoid of emotion. Juliana nodded, unable to trust her voice. She held out the key, her hand trembling slightly. Wesley took it, careful not to let their fingers touch. I'll be in touch about this vision of the assets. I trust you won't make this any more difficult than it needs to be. No, Juliana managed to choke out, I won't fight you on anything. You deserve better than what I gave you. A flicker of something passed across Wesley's face, but it was gone in a heartbeat. Juliana allowed herself to she hoped he might soften, or offer some small comfort or forgiveness, but when he spoke, his voice was firm and final. Juliana, I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. With that, he turned and walked back into the house, closing the door on their shared life with a decisive click. It was no longer hers. Memories washed over her, lazy Sunday mornings, holiday celebrations, quiet evenings, curled up on the couch. All of it was gone, sacrificed on the altar of her own selfishness and discontent. As she climbed into her car, a sob caught in her throat. She had thought she wanted freedom and excitement, a break from the mundane. Now faced with the reality of it, she realized too late the value of what she had carelessly discarded. Juliana started the engine and took one last look at the house in her rearview mirror. She'd realized too late the value of what she'd carelessly discarded. Her old life, the love she'd taken for granted and the future she dreamed of were all behind her now, as unreachable as a mirage in the desert. She drove away, feeling the weight of her decisions. She had destroyed the foundation of her life brick by brick, and now she was left to build something new from scratch. The road ahead was uncertain and lonely, a testament to the consequences of her actions. Juliana realized the freedom she had so desperately craved had become a prison of her own making. The excitement she sought she had turned to ashes in her mouth, and the love she had carelessly discarded, that was the biggest loss of all. It was a wound that would never truly heal, as the house faded from view. Juliana faced the stark reality of her new life. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The future stretched out before her like a blank canvas. With regret and the bitter knowledge of what she had lost, the story of Juliana and Wesley, a tale of love, betrayal, came to an inevitable end. In the silence of her car, driving towards an uncertain future, Juliana finally understood the true cost of her actions. She had gained her freedom but lost everything that had ever truly mattered.